Chapter 1. Under a sheet of blue sky in the overgrown back garden, Marnie knelt over a bowl, washing the long blonde hair of her favourite doll. "I think we'll curl it up today," she said. Her words whipped back at her as an early morning breeze blew into her face, causing a pang of loneliness. Many times she'd reflected on her unnaturally solitary life. Microchipped adults had their liberties curtailed. Only essential workers or those involved with the ruling political party were allowed out. Movements were traced by the government, but because children didn't suffer from the disease, many were encouraged by their parents to escape outdoors, with instructions to keep under the radar of the authorities. Marnie Matthews was the only child living in the long street of grand Victorian houses in one of the wealthier parts of town. At the age of 10, she was still playing with dolls, as they were her only companions, except for Shadow. "We are the lucky ones," her politically active mother would say, excusing her neglect with various explanations. "We are healthy, while many less fortunate people have succumbed to the invisible enemy. You are safe and free from lockdown." With these words, her mother Ida would race off to attend her highly important political meetings with her wealthy friends, who believed they were safe in their mansions. Marnie knew these visits consisted mostly of playing cards and drinking. For Ida, men being a rarity had also ranked above much else in importance. Marnie brushed her curling black locks from her face with the back of her wrist, while the soapsuds dripped onto her designer dress. She liked her hair flowing free, allowing it to stroke her back comfortingly at night, and she rebelled against the fashion of too harsh rope plaits. Her mother Ida valued her daughter's prettiness, and always dressed her in the latest fashions, but in any other way, she hardly existed in her mother's mind. An only child was not Ida's priority. At the beginning of the infection, children were regarded coldly, as adults were suspicious of their healthiness and of their ability to shrug off the murderous disease which killed them in vast numbers. They preferred to repeatedly gape at their screens, waiting for bulletins on the number of deaths. Now locked into their homes, they were rarely seen. The transitory nature of life, the randomness and speed with which death struck the old and vulnerable, had haunted Marnie from as far back as she could remember. As she grew up, the world rapidly emptied of people. She only had vague memories of all those gone, including her kind and attentive father. All that remained was the recollection of her mother whispering into his ear as he suffered at home, "We will be together again. I love you, and you will fight for your life here with us." The battle for his survival continued until he passed. Ida's preaching then extended to her daughter. "Never forget the sacrifices your father made so you could live a comfortable and happy life." Abandoned, all Marnie had left was her ever-extending imagination, a snug retreat which was more real than the crippled world where the eyes of the universe stared down in amazement and wept. Marnie sensed she was being watched and dropped her doll in the water. Shadow stepped into her light and regarded her with a cunning expression. He didn't always have a distinctive face, as he only grew more concrete when he was up to mischief and encouraging her to venture in different and surprising directions. She couldn't ignore him. He was her only friend. He'd always been there, meandering through her life and permeating her being. They understood each other to the core. Marnie rose and followed Shadow along the path, which ran past the side of the house and out into the desolate road. They navigated their way down side streets and took shortcuts through alleys. Outside, everything appeared normal. There was harmony, no signs of the disease, but she knew it was still there, buried beneath the stacking layers of death. By the time they arrived at the cornfield, Marnie was dripping with sweat, but Shadow remained cool. Nature had reclaimed the land, purged of human pollution, and the abundant harvest shot skyward from the plough-rotted soil. Marnie hesitated, dwarfed by the scratchy stems of the plants that stretched for miles over the iron-flat land. Shadow touched her arm with his icy fingers, urging her forward. The breeze had dropped to a flutter. Marnie caught the odd flickering glimpse of the house through the rippling sea of yellow, which caused her to imagine the whole image of the derelict building. She shivered in the murmuring of September heat. A few years earlier, while wandering, she'd come across the time capsule and had peered through the letterbox, only to meet malevolent eyes staring back. Startled, she jumped away and fled the hostile spirits that were waiting to seize and destroy any trespassers. Now she feared other unpredictable encounters. Safe and protected by Shadow, She trailed behind him down a path that cut through an unattended garden full of lovely smells. Reluctantly, she stood in front of the green barrier, uneasily glancing at the letterbox. Shadow pushed the door, and it squeaked ajar and stopped hard against an accumulation of junk mail piled on top of a welcome home doormat. Shadow brushed against her as he entered and encouraged her to follow. Beside the entrance at the bottom of the stairs, 2 coats hung on hooks attached to the green wall, and beneath were a pair of boots still covered in mud from the last time the owner tramped across the field in the rain. Marnie inhaled the damp air and crossed the nightmarish, gloomy hallway to the door of the living room. On her left, the darkness was sucking sunlight through the ragged net curtains of the bay window, and dust particles danced in the disturbing stillness. On the mantelpiece, a carriage clock took pride of place in the centre, with ornaments neatly arranged on either side. Flower-patterned wallpaper peeled away from crumbling plaster, and the chairs were covered in mould. Photographs and paintings lined the walls, lyrically describing the personalities of the inhabitants, a professor and his wife and their pet dogs. There were no pictures of children, so Marnie assumed they were childless. Wandering around, not daring to touch, she sensed the fabric of the building exuded memories of happier times, ragged remnants of love. Everywhere Marnie looked, once cherished objects remained in place, frozen in time on the day the inhabitants left. In the back room she found Shadow seated at a table where cups and plates were arranged and waiting for afternoon tea. Marnie smiled, pulled the chair out beside him and spontaneously clasped the floral teapot. "It's lovely to see you today," she said, pouring the imagined liquid into a cup and then compensating for his limited speech replied for her friend. "Thank you for inviting me. The pleasure is mutual." Seductively, Marnie was drawn into the game, living in the moment and laughing at the absurd, one-sided conversation. It didn't matter. His warm friendship always guaranteed undivided attention. Despite the silent communing, there was a unity in their relationship. They were welded together and connected on every level. Shadow had access to her mind and understood her emotions and needs. Together they sipped from empty cups and ate delicious cakes. With her mood lightened by the game and spurred on by her young energy, she followed her impulse and hurried from the table. "Shadow, count to 100 and then come and find me," she shouted back as she darted out of the room and ran up the stairs. On reaching the landing, she entered the nearest room. Marnie hovered in the doorway. The frayed curtains were pulled and her eyes took a few seconds to adjust to the limited light. In the cloying gloom, the air was damper, hung heavier, and the wardrobe and chest of drawers were oversized and bulky. With the low ceiling pressing down, her eyes focused on the bed where the husband and wife had most probably suffered their brutal demise. On the 2 adjacent pillows, she saw the last indentations where their heads once lay so close. A vision of indistinct people splashed into her mind. She saw a couple, their happiness and love replaced by the dread of having to die alone. For a moment, she fixated on the evidence of the past lives, and then she heard tramping footsteps coming up the stairs. Her guts churned, and an intoxicating thrill ran up her spine. She jumped back into alertness as Shadow pursued her through her dream world, reminding her that she needed to find the best place to hide. Scanning the room, her eyes landed on a large stone fireplace. Pushing into a gap behind the arch, she discovered the masonry was crumbling, and hurriedly burrowed into the hole. "He won't find me here. I must be completely concealed from the outside," she considered excitedly. Marnie held her breath and kept her eyes on the tiled hearth as Shadow entered the room, and the game became more real. The smallest movement would reveal her hiding place, and she wanted to outwit Shadow. Darkness spread into the hollow, causing her to shrink back. Silently, she clawed through a draping mesh of cobwebs and crawled into extending darkness. Blinded in the black void, she searched the space on her knees, feeling with her hands. Marnie was sure she was in a secret room concealed from the rest of the house. Moving around the walls, the space seemed disappointingly empty. Marnie headed back diagonally towards the lighter grey and bashed her knee on an obstacle. Running the fingers of both hands over the surface, she realised she'd found a box. A million dreams painted across her mind, teasing her curiosity. Dust caused her to sneeze several times, so she knew she'd lost the game, and not wanting to prolong her agony, she shuffled and pushed the treasure towards the hole. Scrambling out of the fireplace, she positioned herself cross-legged on the hardwood floor and examined the metal box. Shadow stood mightily above her, almost gloating at how easy she was to find. On the top, written in red paint, were the words, Time capsule, to be opened January 2050. Pushing her nails into the crack between the lid and base, she tried to lever it open. To her displeasure, she discovered the box was sealed. "Shadow, we need to find something to open the lid," she whined. Seeing the box rise from the floor, Marnie leaned back. When it was almost touching the ceiling, Shadow released his grip and allowed it to drop. There was a thud, and the hinges broke, spilling the contents onto the floor. Marnie kneeled and gazed down at the pile of straw, and then rummaged for the treasure of forgotten lives. Her fingers stroked against something smooth and waxy, and to her horror, she saw sunken eyes staring up at her accusingly. There was a strange, sickly, sweet chemical smell, something lethal. She slid backwards to distance herself from the object and stared questioningly up at Shadow. Shadow bent and gently brushed away the brittle stems. Marnie remained for some time, gawping in disbelief at the incredible creature. Part of her wanted to turn away, while the other part compelled her to examine the curious sight. It was naked, neither male nor female, with a shrunken, yellow-skinned body and septic-looking. The short limbs were muscular, and at the end of its long fingers were hooked claws. There was a scowl carved into its face, and its open mouth revealed serrated teeth. "It's embalmed," Shadow's words entered Marnie's head. "What you smell is resins and embalming chemicals. It looks as though it died in the process." Shadow blew away more of the covering, revealing open, leathery wings pulled out from its back. Marnie's emotions clashed. She was repulsed, but also felt a deep pity for the being and wanted to hold it in her empty arms like a doll. It wasn't a baby in need of comfort. The shape was wrong, and its angry eyes caused her to drop her gaze to its body. There, placed around its neck, was a thick gold chain, and on the end hung a large stone with a red heart. "It looks like blood in the centre of the diamond," Shadow said, echoing Marnie's thoughts. She regarded her friend questioningly, and he smiled back with a cunning expression. "Take the jewel." Forcing her mind not to dwell on the gruesome image, she stretched out her hand and reached for the chain. In one swift movement, she pulled it up and over the dead being's head. She observed the swinging pendulum, taking in every detail of the finely cut diamond with its bleeding heart. After many moments, she dropped the unusual item into her dress pocket. Then she slammed the dented lid back on the box and shoved it towards the fireplace, where, carefully lifting it into the hole, she forced it back into its original position. Brushing any dirt off her hand, she rose and headed rapidly towards the door.
If you've enjoyed Chapter 1 and wish to hear the next chapters in this story, please like, subscribe, or leave a comment.